I'm not saying that victory vindicates their actions or justifies their actions, but they were faced with a horrendous dilemma. They responded brutally and effectively. And I don't think anybody would like to be a member of that government faced with the choices available to them.
I think the need for executions faded very quickly, and that by the end of the year no further killing was necessary on either side. But I think by then it's the usual problem with wars. Once they start, they're very difficult to stop. And I think everything got out of control. The Free State Army was only very imperfectly controllable by the Free State government. And of course, on the other side, the IRA were not controllable by anybody, even Liam Lynch, and certainly not by Eamon de Valera.
One question will always overshadow the record of this first Irish government. Would Michael Collins, whom they succeeded, have adopted a policy of executions?
I believe if Michael had lived, those events would not have happened. I believe the strength, the magnetism, the dynamism of his personality would have had an influence there, but equally so. There was a government. The state was operating. Opposition to it, we can now say, looking back, without bitterness, was illegal. There were very tragic and sad things done on both sides.
I think it showed a mean-spiritedness of the people that came after Collins. I'm talking about Cosgrave and O'Higgins, Blythe and Fitzgerald. And I believe that had Collins lived, that you wouldn't have got those excesses. I think he would have prosecuted the war in a vigorous way, the Civil War, on behalf of the Free State. But I don't think it would have got the excesses of state reprisals and unofficial and official executions, or at least the extent of them.
77 people were executed during the war by a government described as unenthusiastic Democrats. By no means all their supporters endorsed this controversial policy.
I didn't like it a bit. No, I didn't like it a bit. I thought it was too severe. But in the executions themselves, there was very little selection as to who should be executed, I thought. You know, anyone to do it was a case of just proving an example that if you break the law, you'll die, and that's it.
There was more executed in the Civil Petty War in Dublin than there was in anything else. They took them out of Mount Chay and shot them, the fellows that were in jail in Mount Chay, they were brought out and shot. You see, they got very bitter altogether in Dublin.
I was a soldier, and my job was to obey orders, and we had a government elected by the people. And I saw nothing wrong in dealing with men who weren't prepared to accept the rule of the people.
The shooting of two TDs in early December provoked another sharp response from the Free State authorities. In emergency session following Sean Hales's death, the government ordered that in reprisal 4 Republican prisoners, Richard Barrett from Cork, Joseph McKelvey from the North, Liam Mellows and IRA leader Rory O'Connor, be executed without trial. The cabinet decision on O'Connor had caused Minister for Justice Kevin O'Higgins the greatest difficulty. Barely a year earlier, O'Connor had been best man at O'Higgins's wedding, just months before he split with his old friend to become Commander-in-Chief of the anti-treaty forces.
Dad, who was in charge now of the army and who obviously had great influence in the conduct of the Civil War, he went to the cabinet and he was supported by his army council, and he said, we must take drastic action to prevent any further shooting of the people who are representing the people of Ireland and who are supporting the democratic process. And it was he who influenced the cabinet to take out, quite illegally, to take out the 4 prisoners from Mountjoy and shoot them. Right up to the end of his life, he always maintained that it was the right thing to do.
It was state terrorism. It was a repressive response. It was outside the bounds of legality. And I guess what they decided was the situation was so grave that they had to take this kind of action. And again, there is this sense that the government doesn't know whether it will survive. There's a real sense of fear and insecurity among government ministers about the ability of the Free State to overcome the rebellion and to survive.
The key ministers were Kevin O'Higgins, Taoiseach W.T. Cosgrave, General Richard Mulcahy, Owen McNeill and his fellow Northerner Ernest Blythe, and Minister for External Affairs Desmond Fitzgerald.
The decision they took was one they took out of a very strong moral conviction that if they didn't do this, the assassination of deputies by the Republicans might lead to the collapse of parliamentary government and to anarchy. That's not a justification of what they did, it's an explanation, because in living in their time, one has to understand how they approach these things. But he had never any doubts, I think, that it was the right thing to do. You may say he should have had, but that's my opinion. But he did not have any doubts that they saved the state by the action they took.
Not everyone was so convinced. Almost for the first time in the Civil War, newspaper editorials and international observers responded critically to the reprisal executions. Among the public, there was a deepening sense of despair.
I actually saw the men who did it coming back from wherever they did it, and they were swinging their revolvers. I saw a couple of soldiers there standing, drinking tea. I suppose it was tea, it was the morning, of course. And a little way at the side, I saw a soldier kneeling in the sentry box. Whoever he was, I suppose he knew the men who had been executed. And there's a gloom over the prison, over the whole city that day. There was a dark cloud.
I wouldn't approve of it. I'd arrest them, and I'd keep them there until such time as there could be some other decision made. But I don't think that they could ever take them out and shoot them.
The Civil War was now barely a war at all, more a series of sporadic acts of sabotage carried out by a handful of anti-treaty activists and aimed principally at blocking the movement of government troops. Railway lines were destroyed, engines derailed, bridges blown up, and stations and signal cabins wrecked. Arrests and executions were the government's response to this dwindling guerrilla campaign, which nevertheless did huge damage to a fragile economy. Bitterness and viciousness were now permanent features of the Civil War fighting. Anti-treaty units, such as this one, remained as fiercely opposed to the treaty as they'd ever been. In one incident in County Wexford, the commander of an anti-treaty unit outraged even his own men when they came across a government officer and troops in a public house not long after the Mountjoy executions.
The officer tried to draw a gun, and he fired a few shots at him with the machine gun and knocked him down, and then proceeded to dress up his wounds. The others all surrendered. And then he brought out four of the others now. They were just common soldiers. He brought one of them after another out to the backyard and killed them. Killed them with the Thompson gun. I left Wexford after that. I thought that was something that...
It was in the morning, and this man came and sat beside me, and I said, good morning. He said, yeah, yes. He said, I'm just after executing a man now, he said. This was the man who was in charge. Just completely as if he was just doing his day's work, you know. He was so casual about it. This was a man who spent another 4 years in France.
And he had just come from the execution.
But then you see that they blow the brains of the man out, then the officer has to do that. When the man is shot down, the officer approaches him and blows his brains out to finish his tribulations, you know.
Executions were alleged also in Sligo. The anti-treaty side claimed that 6 men had been shot after their arrest by government